You know what's fascinating to me? Everyone's asking the same question right now. If Israel genuinely believes Iran is its greatest strategic threat, if Israeli leaders are sitting in rooms saying Iran is months away from a nuclear weapon, then why hasn't Israel just ended it? Why no invasion? Why no ground troops? Why, with all of that military capability, has everything stayed in the air and at a distance? And look, I get why people ask that. On the surface, it seems almost obvious. If you have a mortal enemy, and you have one of the most capable militaries in the world, and you believe the clock is ticking, why not finish it? But the moment you actually start pulling on that thread, you realize the answer is not what most people expect. It's not about hesitation, it's not about international pressure holding Israel back, and it's definitely not about underestimating the threat. The real reason Israel hasn't invaded Iran is something far more unsettling. A ground invasion of Iran could trigger a chain reaction that Israel might not survive. Let me walk you through exactly why. Start with the most basic question. How many soldiers could Israel actually send into Iran? And I mean realistically, not theoretically. The Israeli Defense Forces are genuinely impressive, highly trained, battle-hardened, technologically advanced. Nobody serious disputes that. But impressive doesn't mean unlimited. And when you look at the actual numbers, the picture changes very quickly. Israel has around 170,000 active duty military personnel total. Army, Air Force, Navy, everything combined. Now here's where it gets complicated. A significant portion of those forces are already committed. There are troops along the Gaza border, units in the West Bank, major defensive formations in the north watching Hezbollah, air defense crews protecting cities, naval forces on the coast. These aren't optional deployments you can just pause. These are active security requirements. Once you subtract everything that's already tied down, military analysts estimate that maybe 70,000 active duty personnel could realistically be redirected toward a major external operation. 70,000. Now hold that number in your head. Iran covers 1.6 million square kilometers. Its population is over 85 million people. The terrain is mountainous, complex, and historically brutal for invading armies. Military planners use a general rule of thumb for counterinsurgency operations. Roughly 20 soldiers per 1,000 civilians to maintain meaningful control. Apply that to Iran's population, and you need somewhere north of 500,000 troops just to manage the territory. Israel has 70,000 available. That gap is not a minor logistical challenge. That is a fundamental impossibility. Now, somebody always jumps in here and says, but what about reservists? Israel has hundreds of thousands of reservists. And that's true. On paper, Israel can mobilize around 460,000 reservists. That sounds like it changes everything. But here's the thing people miss. Those reservists have already been called up repeatedly. Gaza, northern tensions, ongoing internal security operations, again and again over the past few years. And every single mobilization comes with a cost that goes way beyond the military. Engineers stop showing up to work. Doctors leave hospitals. Factory workers leave assembly lines. Entire sectors of the Israeli economy start grinding down. And when you do that repeatedly, the social and economic pressure becomes enormous. There is real resistance inside Israeli society to the idea of another massive call-up that keeps hundreds of thousands of people in uniform for months or years at a stretch. The economy cannot just absorb that indefinitely. But even if you somehow solved the manpower problem, even if Israel could mobilize another couple 100,000 people without cracking its own economy, you still haven't solved the second problem. Because a ground invasion of Iran would not happen in isolation. The moment Israeli boots cross into Iranian territory, a completely different front almost certainly explodes. Lebanon. For over a year, Hezbollah has been in the limited back and forth with Israel along the northern border. Rockets, drones, small exchanges of fire. Enough to keep pressure on, not enough to become a full war. And that restraint is not random. Hezbollah is believed to have a fighting force of around 100,000 personnel. Tens of thousands of trained, equipped, combat-ready fighters. For nearly 2 decades since 2006, they have been building tunnels, stockpiling missiles, constructing anti-tank positions, embedding launch sites throughout southern Lebanon. They have studied Israeli tactics obsessively. And according to most serious military analysts, Hezbollah's leadership has been waiting for one very specific moment. The moment Israel commits the bulk of its ground forces somewhere else. Think about what that looks like. Israel launches a ground invasion of Iran. Tens of thousands of soldiers are now operating hundreds of kilometers from home. Supply lines are stretched. Command focus is split. the northern border is suddenly thin in ways it has never been before. That is the moment Hezbollah launches a coordinated ground offensive into northern Israel. Israeli security doctrine is built on one foundational principle: wars get fought outside Israeli borders. Israeli civilians don't see enemy forces inside their towns. That is not just military strategy. It is the psychological contract between the Israeli government and its citizens. If Hezbollah fighters manage to capture even a single Israeli community and hold it for any meaningful period of time, the consequences for Israeli society would be enormous. Not just military consequences, political, psychological, existential in the deepest sense. So you're already looking at a two-front war that Israel's manpower cannot comfortably sustain. But even that is not the most dangerous piece. Because the moment Israeli troops set foot on Iranian soil, one calculation changes more than any other: the nuclear calculation. Iran does not currently have an operational nuclear weapon, at least not officially. But intelligence assessments from multiple countries suggest Iran has already accumulated enriched uranium and has the technical capability to assemble a nuclear device in a relatively short time. Many analysts believe they could cross that threshold within weeks or months if the political decision was made. Until now, Iran has stopped short of that final step. Building the weapon carries enormous costs: deeper sanctions, further diplomatic isolation, a massive international response. The price has been high enough to keep them from crossing the line. But a foreign invasion changes that math completely. If Iranian leadership believes their government faces an existential military threat, not a strike, not a bombing campaign, but actual armored columns moving toward their cities, the pressure to build that weapon immediately becomes overwhelming. History is brutally clear on this point. Countries without nuclear weapons get invaded. Countries with nuclear weapons almost never do. North Korea understands that. Pakistan understands that. Every government on earth understands that. And Iran's leadership absolutely understands it. So the invasion designed to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon could very well be the thing that accelerates Iran getting a nuclear weapon within days rather than months. And once that happens, the entire strategic balance of the Middle East transforms in ways that cannot be undone. Israel has maintained an unofficial nuclear deterrent for decades. The unspoken understanding that if Israel faces destruction, the capability exists to retaliate with devastating force. That deterrent functions specifically because Israel's enemies cannot retaliate in kind. The moment Iran develops a credible nuclear arsenal, that changes. Nuclear deterrence works both ways. If both sides can destroy each other's major cities, any full-scale war carries the risk of mutual annihilation. And here, geography becomes critical in a very cold, very uncomfortable way. Israel is a small country, 9 million people concentrated in a handful of urban centers: Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa. These are not spread across a vast territory. Iran is the opposite: 85 million people across a huge geographic area, dozens of cities, massive territorial depth. In a hypothetical nuclear exchange, both sides suffer catastrophic losses, but the long-term survival profiles look radically different. Israeli strategic planners understand this math. They sit with it, and it makes the idea of triggering Iran's nuclear breakout through a ground invasion one of the most dangerous gambles imaginable. Then, layer on top of all of that, the question of American support. For decades, American backing has been critical to Israeli military operations: intelligence, advanced weapon systems, logistical support, diplomatic cover. But a ground invasion of Iran puts Washington in an extraordinarily difficult position. The United States spent 20 years and trillions of dollars fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. Public appetite for another large-scale Middle Eastern war is basically non-existent. American military planners who watch those campaigns know better than anyone how extraordinarily difficult it is to occupy a large, hostile, national unified country. Most private assessments suggest Iran will be harder than Iraq or Afghanistan ever were. Without strong American logistical backing, Israel cannot sustain extended operations hundreds of kilometers from home. Fuel, ammunition, equipment, all of it needs to move through airspace controlled by other countries: Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Those governments might tolerate limited airstrikes. Supporting a full-scale ground invasion is a completely different political calculation, and most of them would face enormous internal pressure to refuse. So when you add all of this together, here's what you get. A ground invasion requires manpower Israel doesn't have at the necessary scale. It risks opening the northern front with Hezbollah at the worst possible moment. It could accelerate rather than prevent Iranian nuclear development. It faces serious logistical constraints without reliable international support. And it could destabilize the entire region in ways that spiral far beyond anything either side can control. Every path through that scenario leads somewhere extremely dangerous, which is why the strategy you're actually watching is designed to do something different. Not to eliminate the threat, to manage it. Airstrikes demonstrate strength without triggering the full consequences of a ground war. They send signals to domestic audiences and regional rivals. They disrupt facilities, delay projects, create pressure. But they stop just short of the line that could set everything else on fire. That's the real answer. Not courage, not patience, not waiting for the right moment. It's the recognition that crossing that line, actually putting boots on Iranian soil, could unleash consequences that no military doctrine, no reserve mobilization, no American backing, and no nuclear deterrent can fully contain. The distance is not hesitation. The distance is the strategy.